You are listening to Beyond the Checkbox, a podcast that focuses on leading strategies around bringing more mental well-being into the workplace. My name is Ryan Todd. I'm a psychiatrist and the CEO of Adversity. I'm sitting down with industry-leading changemakers to break down their process and see how they are going above and beyond for their workforce mental well-being. You're a non-traditional student.
Yes, very much so.
How? Well, tell me about that. First of all, what is traditional? And I think I have an idea, but I'd like to hear your sense. And then, in what ways are you non-traditional for medical school?
Well, I mean, I don't have a science background, and most of the people around me, or who are considered traditional, do have, very heavy science undergrads. My undergrad was in economics and finance, so as far as you can get from medicine. Also, I'm in a different age group. I started med school in my mid to late 30s, and everybody else is in fact, my older daughter is 21, and I study with a lot of my fellow students who are 21. So it kind of feels a little bit, okay, do I belong here? But at the same time, I think it's important to bring life perspectives, and it's important to keep reminding myself that being different is a good thing. And it certainly has, I think, adds a lot of value to the classroom and to the profession. And also what I'm taking from it and learning from it may be different, but that difference is needed, and that diversity is actually a good thing.
Had you always known, like, you wanted to be a doctor? Was that a thing that you dreamed of? Where did this come to be?
When I was little, when I was growing up, I grew up in a family that's very patriarchal, conservative. Girls aren't supposed to go to school. Girls are only supposed to dream about weddings and being in a very traditional gender role. So growing up, I had big dreams. I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to become a professor. I wanted to make a difference, change the world. And it was a very confusing childhood, because on one hand, I was encouraged. I was celebrated when I was getting the best grades. But on the other hand, I was also being told not to dream too much or too big, because I was a girl, and girls aren't supposed to have big ambitions. And then I was forced into marriage at the age of 16. So that was told to me as this is your destiny. You should be grateful for. You got to the real purpose of being a girl sooner rather than later. And I was shipped off to Canada as a child bride. And then those education dreams were crushed for a very long time. I was in a very abusive marriage for 10 years. But still that dream never really died, even though that voice inside, it may have become dimmer at times, because the voices around me were so loud, but it never really went away. And over the years, I just kept pushing in my little ways to be able to break those barriers and go to school and build a new life for my kids and myself. And here we are, all these years later. It's
wow.
Led me to medicine.
Okay, you just dropped a bunch on us that we gotta go through. And I appreciate you doing that.
I tried to keep it at the Coles Notes version, but it's hard to pack it into an answer.
And I there's some hot buttons there I sort of, in the way I think, I like to start chronologically and just kind of pull out some of the major questions I have, starting like obviously I want to know about, wow, like, you were a child bride, shipped off to Canada, abusive relationship, like, unbelievable adversity, and there's so much there to pull apart. If it's okay with you, I want to start with like what was it like to be highly intelligent? I've never known what that's like, first of all. Second of all, what's it like to be that and then be told, like, you are not you're not supposed to dream. Like you had conversations when people literally told you you're just a girl. You can't dream big. Like what was that? What was that like? Like that must have been a confusing thing too.
Yeah, you pretty much said it. It was the most confusing time. Um, Growing up in an environment where everyone's telling you your dreams are not valid, your identity, who you are, is not valid because of your gender. It's an extremely, you know, trying to find the right word. It's very conflicting. It's like on one hand, you as and I and kind of try to blow it up a little bit. As human beings, we have this, our most fundamental need as human beings is to feel included, it's to feel connection, it's to
Yeah.
feel a sense of belonging, right? But we want to be seen and we want to be accepted and loved for who we are. However, growing up in a society or a culture or a family or a community where everyone's telling you that who you are is actually not okay, this is what you need to be if you want to feel that acceptance and belonging.
But did you know who you were? Like, did you have a sense you were like, okay, I am an intelligent, wanting to be a doctor, dream big person? Did you know that at that time?
Absolutely. I think I can't
Wow.
remember a time in my life when I did not know that. I was so driven about school. I was that annoying student who was upset about the 1% that I lost instead of the 99% that I got on an exam. I was always dreaming big. I want to win a Nobel. I want to be prime minister. I want to be a professor at Harvard. I want to do this. Like
Yeah.
those were the things I used to talk about. But then all my cousins and my friends around me were dreaming about what colored wedding gown they would wear.
Yeah.
And I just never quite understood why they get so excited about it, because I got excited about very different things. And and it it was, I've always felt like a misfit in my life. And growing up, like I think more than any time else in my life, I just felt like who I was, what my dreams were, goals were, was not valid, was not acceptable. So I was always in this kind of push and pull where on one hand I was trying to assert myself in different ways. Like when I was told I can't go outside and play cricket with the boys anymore, I started a girls' cricket team in my school. And then when I was told that
Amazing. Where did you grow up, by the way? What location? Where were you?
Abu Dhabi, I'm
Abu
originally
Dhabi.
born in Pakistan and I grew up in Abu Dhabi,
Okay.
in the UK. So, and similarly, like when I was told that my ideas are too big or too controversial, I was like, all right, well, let's make it a thing. So I started a school newspaper in my tiny little school in that town and started sharing all my ideas of gender equality and whatnot. So I was a bit of an envelope pusher even growing up, but then also on the other hand, I was like, well, if I do this too much, then, or I was told, if you dream so big or you become so smart or you become so educated, how will you find a suitable man?
Who would tell you that?
Oh, family, cousins.
They would say, if you dream too big, you're too smart, you make too much of yourself, you won't find a husband. And did they give an explanatory kind of why was that? Why did they what was the explanation? Like you won't find a husband because
Because men like women who can, read and write and be literate, but not so intelligent that you start outshining the guy,
oh,
that you make them feel uncomfortable. So the whole idea, the whole sort of basis of existence, the purpose of existence for a female was to ultimately land a husband. So you got to do whatever you can to make sure you always tread. You have to get that secret recipe right of being intelligent but not too intelligent, of being smart but not too smart, being educated but not too educated. Somehow there's some kind of magic formula that no one ever seems to get, but some people do, and you got to just figure that out for yourself. So like my aunt, my father's sister, um, she was a highly educated woman. She was a principal at a school. And she didn't get married until much later in life. And she herself used to say to me, see what happened to me. I got too educated. I didn't find a suitable man. Don't make that same mistake. So that was what I grew up with. It was
Okay.
very
Wow.
confusing. And imagine for someone like me who didn't believe in that, and as a kid didn't have much of a voice otherwise. It was very confusing.
What are your thoughts about those perceptions now that you live in a Western liberal democracy and you've seen, let's call it, and we're grateful for it, the kind of the extreme other end of that. What do you make of those perceptions now? And like, obviously, I'm thinking you're thinking those are like very extreme and wild and maybe kind of backwater perceptions. Is there any like hint of it that you can rationalize now, or you think, oh, that kind of makes sense or something? So I'm trying to get a sense of how that comes to be and how that comes to like perpetuate itself.
See, so I'm going to break your question into two parts. The first part is what do I feel about it personally now? I think it's all about ingrained, deep rooted patriarchy, which carries on from generation to generation
Uh,
in terms of rationalizing it. And I think, if you think about it, I mean, these same attitudes that I'm talking about did exist in the Western world not too
sure.
long ago. There are still factions. I mean, I'm a public speaker. I travel the world and I've done a lot of speaking in the US. There are factions of society there that feel that way. There are pockets of society here. I've been all over Canada and I've heard stories of people in their living rooms talking about these kinds of things. Like
Yeah.
a high school teacher in Ontario told me that there's a girl in her class and the girl's own mother is making the girl vacuum in front of potential husbands' families to prove that she's good wife material so that one of those families will accept her. Right.
Hmm.
There are guidance counselors who are always emailing me because they're buying my book, because there are girls in their classes who are being forced into marriage. So it doesn't just exist in some faraway countries. It's around here, it's everywhere, but it's not talked about because silence is the biggest ally of abuse, and not a lot of people have, I guess I wouldn't say have the courage, I think use the courage or cultivate the courage to actually break that silence. And that's one of the main reasons that I've started to speak up, because I know it's not just my story, it's the story of millions and millions of people, especially women and girls around the world. So that's sort of where I stand on this. And what parts of it can I rationalize? I think, the looking at it objectively, and having been in it, but also looking at it from outside now because I'm not in it anymore. The main thing that propagates this and perpetuates this is this intergenerational cycle of hanging on. In fact, when people come to the Western world, even they feel even more threatened by the Western society because they want to hang on to their values. They're not here for the values. They're sometimes here for the standard of living, but they want to still hang on to those values,
Sure.
even though they may be toxic. So you run into these intergenerational sort of cycles where, because, like, for example, my mother-in-law was married at the age of 14. She never went to school beyond grade 8. And she believed that she was doing the right thing and she was living a life of a successful woman because that's what a woman should be. So getting me as a bride in her family at the age of 16 was okay. She was actually physically abused by her mother-in-law. So the fact that she was not hitting me, even though there were many other forms of abuse there, she thought she was a great mother-in-law. So it's all about, like, what you grow up with and what you
Yeah.
internalize as normal, right? And it takes a lot for you to get your head out of the sand and say, oh my God, this is so messed up.
How did you do that? Like, how did you get your head? You were married at the age of 16, uh, and I want to ask about what that process, like how that comes to be. But how did you pull up and say this is weird or different or not what other people experience? Like, how did that come to light for you?
So I think it's a two-part thing. First, it's internal. there was always a voice inside of me that said, this doesn't feel normal. I know everybody tells me this is right. Everybody tells me this is normal. This is supposed to be the way it is, but it doesn't feel okay. Like, why? I was always a bit of a questioner of things. So growing up, I'd be like, well, why? I'm smarter than all the boys in my class. So why can't I have big dreams? Why can't I go to school? Right? Why can't I play cricket? Or when I got married and my ex-husband said that, why can't you just be a normal woman and forget about this school stuff all the time? And I would be like, well, then if I wasn't supposed to dream big, and if you're saying that, God or whatever you believe in he or she makes everything perfect. Well, it was a he when I grew up, but like they make everything perfect. So why did God give me a brain if I'm not supposed to use it? So I was always like, it just never felt right, even though there were times, because of that need to feel included and accepted by my family, I would try to fit into that box. I did try during my marriage to make it work for many years, but it just never really felt okay for me. So there was that. And I honestly thought there was something flawed in me. There was like something wrong with me. I was not a normal woman. There was something broken, or why can't I just be all right with everything the way it is? Why do I have to be so weird? Like, I grew up believing I was so weird. And then when I kept pushing for my education, and having lived in Mississauga, Ontario for all my marriage, and not even having high school when I got married and came to Canada, I finished high school through distance learning because I wasn't allowed to go to a regular high school. Then I worked as a babysitter at home and saved money secretly to eventually be able to go to university. But that whole process took 10 years. And when I started university, I was still married. I was 26. I was a mother of 2 kids. I was married. And here I was in university, and I was being treated for the very first time in my life with kindness, respect, admiration, for the very things that I was ridiculed all my life for: my intelligence, my individuality, my goals and dreams, my ambitions. And I thought, well, then what's going on here? Like, am I this rock star that everybody at school seems to think I am? Or am I this worthless, useless creature because that's how I'm being treated at home? And that is when my world started to shift. And I really was like, well, maybe I'm not the crazy one. Maybe the people around me are wrong. Maybe there's nothing flawed about me. Maybe the system around me is flawed. And so that's when it started to, like, everything I'd internalized started to come forth. And one day, as I was walking on campus, I came across a sign outside the Health and Counseling Center at U of T, and it had a bunch of questions on it. Do you feel like you are living in fear, like you don't have a voice, like you're intimidated, like you can't be yourself? It really truly felt like that sign was calling out to me, and went in and I made an appointment. And a few days later, as I was sitting across from my counselor for the very first time, the floodgates open, and I just started to say things like, can you please tell me what's wrong with me? Why do I keep having these big dreams? Why can't I just be okay with the way things are? What is that secret to being a good wife that keeps eluding me? And this was the first time anyone ever said to me, it's not your fault. What you're going through is abuse, and it's not okay. And there are options, and there are ways forward. And that's when I started to really learn about abuse and how it perpetuates, and the cycle and the intergenerational cycles. Growing up, my daughters were growing up in that environment, and I wanted to break that cycle for them. I didn't want the same thing to happen to them what happened to me. So all of those things, and learning about my rights as a Canadian, as a woman, as a human being, that's what gave me ultimately the courage to be able to leave, because I was like, okay, because that's the time when I was like, I'm not the crazy one here. I'm not the wrong one here.
How old were you at this time?
That voice inside of me was validated, and that's what it took. I was when I left my marriage, I was 28.
You left your and then you started university. How old were you?
I was 26, so I was in my second year of undergrad.
And you had at this point had 2 kids. You had your first child when you were how old?
18.
18. Okay. Is it there's maybe some really rudimentary questions here for me. Is it most common that a somebody who gets, I guess, forced into marriage, that's an abusive relationship? Like, is that ever a situation where it's not abusive, or is it like most of the time that becomes abusive?
Well, you just answered your own question, right? Being forced to do anything.
That's abuse from step one for sure. Yeah, yeah.
And what is abuse really? Abuse is not slaps and kicks. Abuse is about power and control.
Mm,
Power and control can be exerted in many forms. And a lot of abuse is non-physical. I mean, physical abuse is just the tip of the iceberg. All
yeah,
the stuff underneath, emotional, verbal, financial, all these things can be. In fact, so many victims of abuse are never actually hit, and they think they're not being abused when they have been. And so when you think about abuse, it's if there's a relationship that the starting of that relationship, there's such a huge power imbalance, right? Like, first of all, from an age perspective, the
yeah.
choice
Wow.
of the woman being taken away. Like, he was 11 or 12 years older than me. I was a teenager. He was a grown man. I came to Canada as a newcomer. He was established here. I had no idea about my rights in this country, no friends, no family. I had no clue about where to go. So there's a scene in my book where, there's one of the first times he hit me, and I run into the bathroom with the cordless phone in my hand, the home phone, and I'm like, I dial 911, but right as I'm about to press the dial button, I my I stop, because I just don't know what's going to happen then. Where will I go?
Yeah.
I don't have family here. I don't have any support. I don't have friends. I don't have money. I don't even have a high school diploma. So
Mm,
imagine the power imbalance. If a relationship is starting with a power imbalance, it's starting with someone's choice and autonomy being taken away because they're forced into it. How can that be not abusive?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Even if the victim in there says, though, oh, I'm not being abused. Well, it starts from a place of abuse. And abuse, again, a lot of times it hurts me so much to see how many people don't even recognize that they're in an abusive relationship. Um, like, I've worked quite closely with the violence against women organizations in Canada, and one of the hotlines here in Ontario called Assaulted Women's Helpline. Like, one of their senior staff once said to me that the one of the highest number, like the one of the most asked questions when people call us is, he's not hitting me, but this is what he's saying, this is what he's doing. Is that abuse? Am I being abused?
Is that abuse? Yeah. That's the common question. Wow. Okay. And how common is this in Canada? Like, it still blows my mind that you were like shipped here as a bride at such a young age to Canada. Like, I'm like, this is a country where that doesn't happen. That's kind of what I'm thinking, but that's not true at all.
A lot of it happens. I'll share with you something. A couple of years ago, McGill came out with a study that there have been over almost 4,000 marriage licenses issued in Canada, in all provinces, for underage girls with older men. People don't know, but child marriage is actually legal here.
It's legal.
A girl under 18, so marriage is 18 or 16 with parental consent. People think that means, oh, two high schoolers falling in love and their parents signed off, yes, they can get married. That's not what it looks like. What it looks like is a parent signing off on a marriage form and taking a daughter to a mosque or a synagogue or a church or wherever, and then you don't have a choice, you have to marry this person. What's a 16-year-old gonna do? She gonna go against her family? Like, I've
Yeah.
heard from so many women in Canada who this has happened to. There's a woman that I mentor. She was in Vancouver. She was 16. Her father picked up a marriage license kit from a drugstore shelf, signed off for her, and got her married to a 33-year-old man. And now, after a decade later, she had to fight her way out of it. And she was living here. She grew up here. She went to school here.
Your parents consented to your marriage?
Absolutely, yeah. Parents do that because they think that's the right thing to do. That's, they're getting their girl to her real purpose sooner rather than later. And So
Mm.
not only does it, and that 4,000 number that I'm telling you about, that doesn't even include women like me that are brought here as child brides. Those are just marriages that happen in Canada. My marriage happened in Pakistan, and then I was brought here. Or girls that are taken away, to wherever the home country is during the summer vacation, and then they get married over there. And there are so many stories like that I've heard over the last several years of.
What would your parents say about you talking about this right now? What would they?
Oh, they're not, they wouldn't be happy. Like my father's no more, but my mom is. And, no matter what I do and how many people I have, I'll always be a failure in her eyes because I don't prescribe to the beliefs that she tried to instill in me.
So the best-selling book, the medical school, all that stuff, failure.
None of that matters. Failure.
Wow. It's really something. It's such a strong pull. And I'm trying to put myself in your mom's shoes to think like, yeah, like is there some element of like if we ship you to Canada, I say ship in like a really trite and maybe inappropriate way, so I apologize. But it would send you to Canada, like is there like an economic thing, like it'll be economically taken care of? Was that part of the consideration too? Or was that not on the
Economically, but more than that, it was, well, you'll go to school there. We won't be worried that you're on your own. You'll have your husband to take care of you. We can't. You have these big dreams. It's not like we can just send you by yourself because you're a girl. If you were a boy, it would be a different story. So this is the best way for you to be able to go to school, and also we don't have to worry about you. Otherwise, what will people say? So there was some of that. There was also my father was very abusive all his life. Like I grew up in a very dysfunctional household, and when there was also an element of maybe this is the way I'll be able to escape my family. Like for me, at least personally, at 16, what do you know, right? Like
yeah.
going from frying pan to the fire. So it was a lot of elements, but the main thing is it's so acceptable. It's so like, in fact, a lot of the family members and cousins and everybody like, oh my God, this is such a huge accomplishment. You're the
Oh,
first girl
really?
among
Yeah.
all your cousins and everyone to get married. And I'm like, really? This is an accomplishment? Because I remember that my wedding day, I was like decked up in red and gold and sitting beside this man who I'd never met before, who was so much older than me, and I was now his property. And it just felt so wrong on every level. But everybody else was smiling and dancing and laughing and telling me congratulations, and as if it's such a big accomplishment, but it just felt so wrong.
Take me through the emotions there of like I can't even put my like any obviously I can't put myself in those shoes. But like what was going through your mind at the time? Like you got married, people were telling you this is an accomplishment. You know, you were did you know at this point you were going to be moving to Canada?
Yeah. I mean, he was already here in Canada, and his parents met my parents, and they just, decided everything among themselves. And then I was simply told of the decision. And then he flew to Pakistan for the actual wedding and then brought me back here. So it was it was a very scary time. I remember the first time I saw him was the day before my wedding day, and I didn't even see him or meet him or have a conversation with him. It was like we were surrounded by the family and his parents and my parents and everybody. And I was told to keep my head down with the veil in front of my face. And I just kind of peeked up like this just so I could see his face. And it felt like, oh my God, he's a grown man. Like I was in high school. I was in grade 11, right?
Yeah.
He's like, how will I ever be friends with him? Like my friends were kids like me, right? um it was just so, it was very scary. It was very confusing. It was just, it was, I think the biggest emotion that I can name is just terror. I was terrified.
Is it not statutory rape? Is that not the law around?
Of course it is. In fact, I say that child marriage is actually legalized pedophilia.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
absolutely is. In fact, if there was no marriage, that would be statutory rape. But because there's a marriage license, it makes it okay.
Wow. Wow. So I mean, you're
That research I told you about McGill, for example, there were examples in that paper that there were marriage licenses issued. Like there was one of a 16-year-old girl with a 51-year-old man in New Brunswick. So
yeah.
how is that not pedophilia? How is that not statutory rape? Would that be acceptable if there was not a marriage license? No.
So the law is still complicit, or at least in a way supportive of this happening. Like that hasn't changed. And is this being put on the table as something that should change? Have you seen any movement there?
I've been speaking about it quite a bit in whatever way I can. I've brought it up. I've written letters. I speak a lot about it in my speeches. I was invited to Ottawa to speak in front of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. I was very vocal about it there. I brought it up to the Minister of Status of Women and all kinds of things. But unless it's put on the table as a platform for one of the parties, it just goes under the radar.
Yeah.
It is, I often say, like, a girl under 18 in this country cannot vote. She cannot buy alcohol. She cannot own property. She cannot even get a credit card, but she can be forced to enter the most important contract of her life.
Wow. Yeah. You've you know you saved money, you went to university, you divorced your then husband. That must have been just a difficult legal proceeding and everything, and family pressure to stay with him. And then you worked for a period of time before you got into medical school, correct?
Yes, I did my first degree in economics and finance, because at that time, even though I thought about med school, I mean, like, that's a long road. And my job, my goal at the time was to get a degree that would get me a job so I can stand on my own 2 feet and put food on the table for my children. I was in survival mode. So I didn't think
Yeah.
about what I want to do. I thought about what I needed to do to just get my head above water. Right. I was drowned. I was living, like, when I left my marriage for the next 2 or 3 years, I was living in poverty. I was working 4 or 5 minimum wage jobs at a time just to make ends meet. I was raising my children single-handedly. I was selling homemade butter chicken and biryani to students on campus to pay for groceries. I was working night shifts at the student center, selling bus tickets and movie tickets to other students. I was doing whatever I could find, and I was tutoring, I was TAing, and then and it was only after, like, when I graduated, my life started to change from a financial standpoint. So I was, and I was also, not to, like, that practical stuff was hard, but the worst thing was the emotional stuff and the backlash that I got from my family and my community, because I'd done something so unthinkable for a woman. Like, women don't leave. You got to stay and make it work. What are you doing? Like, my brother-in-law called me after I graduated from university. I graduated as the top student in the entire University of Toronto. I won that. There's a scholarship at U of T called the Moss Award, which goes to one person annually from all three campuses. I was the winner in 2013.
Wow.
And the next few weeks later, my brother-in-law called me and said, what's the point of you winning all these awards and scholarships if you failed at the real purpose of being a woman? Shame on you. So that's the kind of stuff that I still face. So it was very debilitating at times. And there were times that I'm like, I don't want to be a source of shame for my family forever. And maybe, like, what am I doing? And there were times when I just felt so much pain and stigma and everything. So that was really hard to deal with. And now at that time, I just wanted to simply survive. And it's when I graduated and I got all that academic success is when I started to think about speaking up. And the main reason for that was because I knew my story is not just my story. And I wanted to do my part to make a difference and break the silence. So I started to share my story. I thought a few people will read it. Maybe it might make a difference to some. And I had no idea that it would blow up into a full-fledged speaking career and a best-selling book and all these things that have happened. And then on the other hand, like on one hand, I was doing all this amazing advocacy work and really getting so interested in all the things I speak about and from a mental health perspective as well. And then on the other hand, I was working in banking and it just didn't feel right that I'm doing this job to pay the bill so I can really do what I love to do.
Yeah.
And I think, in COVID 2 years ago, in 2020 is when I think COVID gave a lot of us a chance to pause and reflect. And it was a time when I was like, I'm done doing what I need to do. I want to do what I want to do. And I took a chance and I quit my banking job and applied to med school. And here I am, almost halfway done,
Wow.
which it feels very surreal.
Do you still deal with some of the like quote unquote shame around it? Like despite the enormity of your success, do you still carry some of the baggage of like, oh, I didn't do the purpose of my life, that stuff?
No, I don't anymore. I've let go of that a long time ago. So I don't internalize it, but it is definitely inflicted on me. My own mother, like I've had to break ties with my mother because, like I said, in her eyes, I'll always be a failure. I don't have any contact with my family back in Pakistan.
Is that right?
Or
Yeah.
else. So it's certainly like I've had to draw very firm boundaries and cut a lot of people off. But it's been painful, but it's also been liberating to do that. And, the work that I do today is like, I always think, a lot of people go through trauma and adversity in life. I think a lot of things happen to us that are out of our control, but how we choose to get through it, how we go through it, and what happens at the other end of it is a choice in many ways. And when I think about my life, I feel like I'm living proof of the fact that there is a lot of life and beauty after trauma and adversity. And I just want to help make that a reality for other people. I want to use what I've learned through life and through experience and combine that with medical knowledge and expertise and training and really make a difference for people at large, not just from a clinical standpoint, but also from education, awareness, bringing a lens of diversity and inclusion and equity into the field of health and mental health. And, so that's what has really led me to med school, and very, very excited to be here. It's a long road, but it's so worth it.
What do we have to do in the workplace to make sure, these things are well known, that we can move the needle on like some of these enormous inequities and power differentials? Like what's your take on this in terms of what we have to do? You're about to be, well, you're part of a large organization now, medical school. You were in the workforce. You see the inequities in different kind of spectrums. Like what do you think we got to do? How do we move this?
It's not going to be, there's no magic formula. I think it has to be a very multi-pronged intentional approach. The first thing I would say from a wellness standpoint, my work is very much at that intersection of mental health and equity, diversity and inclusion. So from a wellness standpoint, if you have a diverse workforce, right, and you give them all the same thing for their wellness, it's not going to work. It has to be intersectional. You have to build an intersectionality to corporate wellness. Because imagine if I'm going to say, okay, everybody gets, 10 therapy sessions per year in my company. Some people may not need any. Some people may need 50, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to give everyone the same thing, that's just giving privileged people more privilege and giving underprivileged people just not enough. Equity is about not giving everyone the same thing, but giving everybody what they need in order to be at the level playing field. And some people need more, some people need less. And justice is about breaking those barriers down so everyone can actually, just feel free to be included in who they are. So that's That's sort of from a wellness standpoint. And then from the equity, diversity, and inclusion standpoint, you can have all the right kind of people in the room. I can have, my quotas of like, I want these many Black people, these many Indigenous people, these many people of color, these many LGBTQ plus people, like okay, I've checked all the boxes, brought all the people in. But if they're expected to be and behave and talk and think and share and dress and everything the same way as the people who've already been there for generations, what's the point? What's the point? You're actually setting these people up for failure. It's actually, you're going, you want to say you're promoting diversity, or actually going against what your intentions are, because you're bringing them in and actually torturing them. And I cannot tell you how many times I felt that way personally, the microaggressions that come in. And those are, microaggressions are what I call death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not like one big thing that happened. It's like the little things people say to you. Like a boss one time said to me, like when I brought up to him that he was saying disrespectful things to me and that wasn't okay. And he said, well, I think the reason you're feeling disrespected is because of the emotional baggage you carry from your past. And he thought it was a joke. He thought it was an offhand comment. My daughter, she's 21 and she used to work at Starbucks, and she would tell me stories like that every day that happened to her. Like one customer came in and said, hey, just put enough cream in my coffee so that it matches the color of your skin. And people think this stuff doesn't bother us or doesn't matter. No. And so if you're going to bring people in, but you're not going to change your culture to be inclusive, if you're not going to educate your workforce on these topics and issues, these are not appropriate things to say or do or behave. If you're not going to create that inclusive environment before bringing the people in, you're actually doing more harm than good to the cause. So there has to be a very intentional and intersectional approach to these things, because it's not about, bringing parts of you. Like we're not robotic creatures that I'm going to leave these parts of myself at the door and then show up to work. We're whole human beings. And yeah, there are parts of us that we don't want, to say out loud in the workforce or whatever. That doesn't mean, we become completely different at our core. And to celebrate people for who they are and the ideas that they bring, we have to be deliberate. And we have to be deliberate in a way that not just bringing people in, but actually making sure that they know that they belong. I'll give a quick example. 6 years ago, I was asked by the University of Toronto if I'd be interested in a seat, to apply for a seat on the board of directors, which is governing council at University of Toronto. And they asked me if I would be interested to apply for a seat to be an alumni governor. So out of the 50 members of the governing council, 8 of them are alumni governors. When I looked at the list of the alumni governors, all of them were old, white, very successful, retired men doing amazing things, but pretty much the same. And here I was, 32 or 33 years old at the time. And they're asking me to apply fresh. I'm like, I've just done my master's. I've just started my career. I'm like, why are they asking me to apply? Like, am I going to be just a diversity token? What's going on here, right? And I applied anyway, because I'm a firm believer when an opportunity knocks on your door, you go through it and then you figure out how to do it. So I applied and I got elected. And then the first time we had a reception for the incoming governors, there's these 7 middle-aged white men in their black and gray suits, and I walk with a red dress, and I'm just feeling completely out of place there. And the chair of the College of Electors, which is the body that elects alumni governors, he came up to me, and he's also a middle-aged white man, Bay Street lawyer, ultra successful, and I'm completely standing there feeling like, what am I doing here? Do I belong here? And he comes up to me and says, Samra, if you're wondering that you're here because of your gender, your skin color, or your age, I want you to throw that out the window. Yes, we wanted more diversity in the application pool, and that's why we invited you to apply. But after that, you were put through the same rigorous screening and interview process and everything else that like every other applicant. And you are here because you deserve to be here, because you belong here, because you want your voice here, and because you were head and shoulders above everyone else that was in the pool. And he didn't need to say that to me. He could have stood in a corner and said, well, of course she knows she belongs here, right? Because I'm sure he knows he belongs there, right? He didn't have to say that to me. But the fact that he did, it was such a huge gift. It made me feel like, yes, of course I'm going to bring forth my ideas. And since then, I became the youngest ever and the first woman of color to become chair of the UTM Campus Council, the same campus where I was one of the older students when I started.
Yeah.
And when I go into the council chambers, there's the wall has all the pictures of the past chairs, and they're all men. And then there's going to be my picture, and I want to make sure that the pictures after me look different than the pictures before me. So it takes that kind of deliberate effort. It takes paying it forward. It takes, sometimes you grab a seat at the table, but then you also make sure that you're pulling other seats alongside you. And it takes a very deliberate approach from not just people who are trying to break those barriers like myself, but also the allies who are working alongside, the leaders who are in those positions. Privilege, I say, itself is not a bad thing. We all have some form of privilege. For all the adversity and the discrimination and everything that I've faced, I also carry privilege in the fact that I was fluent in English when I came to Canada. I'm able-bodied. I'm straight. There's other privileges I carry. So privilege in itself is not a bad thing. It's about how you use your privilege. Are you using it to hang on to it because but because equality to you feels like oppression? Are you using it to just protect it because that serves you? Or are you actually using that privilege to be an ally, to break barriers for others, and to level the playing field, and to really be deliberate about it? And that's what it takes. In allyship, I always say, it's not about grabbing the microphone and speaking on someone's behalf. It's about amplifying their voices. People don't need us to save them. People need us to get out of their way sometimes so that they can save themselves.
Give them the microphone. It's amazing. Well, like, first and foremost, congratulations. I mean, you've achieved so much in a short period of time. And now you're just getting started with a whole new medical career. It's incredible. I think that, one of the many reasons that people gravitate to you is there's not a shred, not a thimble of inauthenticity. Everything you say it's not for sales of books. It's not for, your image or your profile. It's just so you could educate and get the message across. It's just so genuine. And so I really felt that, and I appreciate you sharing us with that today. And our listeners will really benefit from the message. And then so much gold there around the workplace. That story about that person coming up to you and telling you the reasons that you became board chair, that resonates, because that's a way that we can be an ally, is dispel the myths that we sometimes create around, let's say, affirmative action as an example, and tell people who deserve it that they deserve it because of XYZ. Give them the genuine reasons. That's a simple takeaway that I really appreciate. So yeah, thanks for being on the show. This was awesome. And you have a lot of followers, so I appreciate you choosing our podcast to try and get some more of your messaging across. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you for inviting me. This was an absolute joy, and I look forward to keeping in touch. And you're someone who's taken a medical career and carved it into your own thing and making a difference in your own way, and that's inspiring to me. And I think it takes effort from I always say, each one of us can make a difference, and then together, if we all do that, that's when we create real change. So
Yeah.
It's amazing to meet someone who's part of that change.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there will be work for us to coalesce on around, especially around this really important DE&I topic. You have a very obviously important, but an expert lens on it, and so we'll figure out a way to work together on this, because it is the leading issue of our time right now.
Absolutely, and it's such an important issue, especially as we're going into a world where people think the pandemic is over, but yes, pandemic itself might be over, but then there's consequences and effects of it that will last for generations. And again, if we try to use one size fits all approaches that are not rooted in EDI, we're only we're not doing much at all. We're going to be leaving a lot of people feeling unheard and unsupported. So, and I think workplaces have such a huge role to play in that in that space. So, I think it would be great to be able to talk about that more.
Are you going to be a psychiatrist or what? What are you thinking here?
Yes, I am thinking about.
Awesome.
That's number one. Everyone tells me to keep my mind open, but I think at this stage of my life, I know what I want to do and what my interests are. So definitely looking into going into psychiatry.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great field. It's a very general field too, right? Like it's not you kind of think there's niches, but it's a very open field to be a psychiatrist. So yeah, congrats on everything you're doing. Any way we can help, we will.
Absolutely. And keep in touch and let me know if there's any way I can help and contribute to your work. That would be
awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Take care. Bye. Talk soon.
So what did you think of that?
I was like, where did Ryan find this woman? She was amazing. It was like one of the best podcasts we've ever done.
Yeah. It was just so, like, within the first 2 minutes, she just dropped some like truth bombs. I'm like, what? Like, just repeat that again. You were a child bride at 16 and like shipped to Canada, and like it just like hit me of like, oh my God, we're into like a real interview here right away. It was awesome. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking about at 16. Like, right? Like what? I was thinking about like playing hockey in like the next game and like
how many LimeWire CDs you can illegally sell.
Yeah, the privilege that I had growing up was, man, I got to think about, how many CDs I'm going to burn and sell for $10 at school illegally, not get shipped off to another country. It's so unbelievable that, and she had she speaks about it in a really articulate way. Like so often with people I find who have faced trauma, there's a bunch of theory around this, but because they've had to work so hard to like ablate or kind of block some of their thoughts because they're so painful, they kind of like carve out parts of their memory. It's really common for people who have faced trauma not to be able to tell a story from start to finish. And that's part of like trauma therapy, is getting people to tell a story of themselves start to finish. She was the opposite. She told like a beautiful story of adversity and like with her daughters. And yeah, it was really gripping. I agree. It was one of the best podcasts we've done. I don't know. I think she reached out to me on LinkedIn and was like, hey, I'm in medical school. Do you have any advice on like starting businesses after medical school? I'm like, this is like too good of an opportunity. Need to come on the podcast. Yeah, we were very grateful for it. So awesome.
Well, I'm glad you got her, and I'm looking forward to putting this on the interwebs.
Awesome. Thank you, listeners. This is Ryan Todd from Beyond the Checkbox, where you learn how to integrate more mental wellness into your organization, and we learn through amazing stories and frontline leaders. Thank you, Samra, for coming on the podcast today. It was an extra special episode of Beyond the Checkbox. Thank you. Please like and subscribe, and please continue to look out for our podcasts as they come online in the coming weeks. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.